Hey guys, in this video we're going to another video on critical theory. In this one, we're dealing with a guy who's not strictly speaking a critical theorist, so get that straight right away. His name is Marshall McLuhan. He was a Canadian philosopher, and actually, whereas critical theory grows out of Marxism, he was a conservative Christian, writing in the 1960s and 1970s. I'm including him in critical theory because his theory is particularly critical of the effect that TV media is having on people, and he's a really insightful theorist. Nowadays, conservatism is a term in our society that's more or less synonymous with the Republican Party, and I don't think that is a great development. There's nothing wrong with the Republican Party or conservatism, but I think conflating those two misses out on, or it makes us forget about what conservatism originally meant. Conservatism means somebody who is slow to change, and that can be a good thing, right? When we think about conservatives versus progressives, the way it has been, the development of those two terms has kind of led us to think progressives are in favor of change and conservatives are against change, and that's not necessarily the best way of thinking about it. A progressive being in favor of change more quickly than a conservative suggests that both groups are looking at society as it is going to evolve. It's just one of them is thinking, well, let's slow things down. And that's more where Marshall McLuhan was. So let's deal with him in terms of why he thought we should be slowing down and thinking about the effect TV was having on us. His most famous book comes out in 1964, and it's called Understanding Media: Extensions of Man. I'm not saying you shouldn't read it, but it's maybe easier to read people who have digested McLuhan, because he didn't particularly care about being coherent 100% of the time. He sort of had a academics take themselves too seriously perspective on academia, and so he was perfectly comfortable with contradicting. In fact, he was contradicting himself. In fact, in one of his debates with a sociologist, he said, "You don't like my ideas? Don't worry, I've got others." Kind of getting to the point, or making the point that let's not take ourselves too seriously. Let's try to come up with ideas that are important without having our egos attached to it, which I think is pretty cool. But it does make for a less than coherent approach to writing. It just didn't matter to him that much. But that book, The Medium is that book, Understanding Media, had what is sometimes somewhat famously been handed down to us, the term or the phrase, the medium is the message. And that's basically what we're going to look at in this video. So usually when we think about communication media, we think about communication media sending content to us. So like I watch a TV show, and then we get a message from that content. So if I watch a sad movie, it makes me sad. The message comes from the content. McLuhan says, he doesn't say that doesn't happen, but he says that's not the important message that we're getting. He says that message, the message that content gives us, is temporary, but the medium itself sends a lasting message. What he means by that, the message is the thing that affects you, right? I just talked about a sad story having an effect on me. He says, don't pay attention to the temporary effect that the content has on you. Pay attention to the long-lasting effect that the medium itself has on you. And so what he did was he contrasted print culture, basically the culture that we are living in from the 1400s through the, I guess, early 1900s, with electronic culture. He doesn't have tremendous amounts to say about radio, so we're going to contrast print versus television. He said, okay, so here's the deal with print culture. And again, just to underline this, regardless of the content, just the medium. He says it produces a world that is orderly and categorizable. And if you think about reading something, the authors almost always, with the exception of McLuhan himself, the authors almost always go to great pains to really explain things to you. It takes a lot of effort to read because what you are getting is somebody saying, the world is complicated, let me organize it for you. And for that reason, it takes a long time. He also said that he's a conservative Christian, so he did, and it's worth mentioning, he said it's a world that becomes increasingly secular and a world that becomes increasingly specialized as well, which are things that we've kind of seen throughout this course. But the idea of an orderly and categorizable world is important. It's important for this reason as well. The world is not orderly. I mean, the world is chaotic. In order for us to go outside and see some order, that takes cognitive effort. And the point McLuhan's making is that authors do this for us. They make the world coherent for us. He said that if you have this sort of a culture that is producing order and a sense of an orderly and categorizable world, you are going to produce certain types of people. Readers are rational. They are also individualistic, and he meant specifically reading is an individualized activity. Whereas an oral culture is a culture that involves interactions with people. Reading, I mean, there's an interaction between the author and the reader, but when I go to read a book, I am making a decision to not interact with anybody else. So he said that in the process of becoming readers, we become more individualized as well. And that takes us back to the idea of Renaissance humanism as well. Renaissance humanism is spurred by the development of the printing press. So all this kind of works together. Okay. Let's not take this too far. We're in the world of Weberian ideal types. It's not as though every person was rational who read. It's not as though every person was not committed to their community or their family. And it's not as though every person read books and then completely understood the world. Right? He's saying print culture has the tendency to move us in this direction. Then he says, so what about the culture of TV? He says that's going to do something different for us. Electronic culture, he says, produces a world where our experience is that everything is happening simultaneously. There's no clear order or sequence. And you think about a person who is changing channels. What you have is a sense of this now, and then this now, and then this now. Every time I change the channel, I'm basically shifting my perspective to something that is unrelated and it is also happening simultaneously with the thing that I just left on the other channel. It could be that I'm watching a football game and then all of a sudden I'm now watching a news report about forest fires, and then I'm watching political debate, and then I'm watching, a protest somewhere. And all of these things are happening together. Whereas if I'm learning about those things in a newspaper, I'm not jumping from one thing to the next. I might get to all of those things, but it's sequential. Here, everything is happening simultaneously. The term that he coins for this, which I think is a wonderful term, and I'm usually not a huge fan of things like this, he calls it all at onceness. The experience of having a TV and changing channels is the experience of everything is happening at one time. He says this is going to produce, this sort of experience of the world is going to produce a different type of person. His assessment of people who are produced by a TV culture, which is a little bit Durkheimian, right? Durkheim said that we are produced by the social facts that exist in our society, and McLuhan's following that. He says it produces docile people who, and this is the stereotype of somebody watching TV, right? They're kind of slack-jawed and they're just taking it in. He doesn't say that it is not a complicated neurological process, but that what it requires you to do is sit there and absorb. Whereas reading is an active process of making sense of this person's words. TV is just letting that reality that's coming at you wash over you. So he says there's a degree of docility in it. The other thing that he said, and this is, I think, really prescient on his part, is he says, this is not going to create individuals. This is going to create tribalistic people. People who, he says, are all within reach of a single voice or the sound of tribal drums. McLuhan was afraid of this world. He said there's a profound risk of mass terror and sudden panic because these docile people are all receiving this, like, messages from potentially a dear leader. So those are the differences between what he says is print culture and electronic culture. Now, again, remember, he's not talking about the content of what is being given right now. All he's talking about is the effect that it has on us to partake in electronic media as compared to print media. And that's why he says the medium is the message because it changes our way of experiencing reality. Okay, this is not taking me quite as long. I'm sorry, it's over 10 minutes, but it's not taking, we're at the end now. All right, so really important for him is to remember that it's not the content of the media, it is the experience of the media that changes our experience of reality. That's an incredible, profound way of thinking about things that is shocking to me. Because it's so easy to focus on the program or the article or book that you're reading and not think about what the experience of partaking of that medium does to you as a person. We're going to end with a killer quote from him, and it should be terrifying to you. I'm going to try to make it so. He says, each medium produces a new form of human being whose qualities are suited to it. In other words, you and I, by virtue of being alive in the age of the internet, are different kinds of human beings than were alive before the internet, and they were different than were alive before the advent of TV, and they were different types of human beings than were alive before the printing press. We have had sociologists talk to us about the importance of interaction before this, and McLuhan fits into that tradition. What he's saying is just broaden your ideas about what interaction involves. Right now, I'm clearly interacting with you. It's a little bit of a one-way interaction, but I'm interacting with you through the screen, right? I'm shooting this video, and then you're consuming it, and it's an interaction. He said we don't think about books as interactions, and we certainly don't think about watching TV or watching a movie or something as an interaction, but it is. When we say mass media, we're talking about mass media of communication, and communication is just another word for interaction. Okay, so you should be freaked out by this. As always, kind of be aware of the fact that once you understand these things, you can make your own choices about how you want to proceed through life, but be aware that we are being changed by this. And that's why I'm including McLuhan in with our critical theorists, because while he's not concerned with alienation specifically, which is, where the Marxists come from, it's just the idea that culture, the critical theorists are thinking culture alienates us now. It's not so much the economy. McLuhan's not talking about alienation, but he's absolutely talking about our ability to have fulfilling lives. And he's saying, this is what you're up against. If you partake in this sort of, in this medium of communication, if this is how you are getting interactions, this is the consequence for you. Terrifying stuff. All right, I will see you in the next one.